Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Today on My Healthy Minutes, brought to us by ogpay.com, we are featuring my good friend, Amy Kennedy, Education Director of the Kennedy Forum, and we are joined by her good friend, JD Ouellette, Equip's Director of Lived Experience. Now, at Equip, they help families recover from eating disorders in the comfort of their own home, and their virtual evidence-based care is provided by a dedicated 5-person team. Today, we're chatting mental health, children, and why eating disorders are on the rise. During the pandemic, we may have seen more children and teens go to the emergency room with mental health problems. And there has been a notable rise in eating disorders, particularly among adolescent girls. Eating disorders include a range of unhealthy relationships with food and concerns about weight. But sadly, eating disorders are very common. In fact, 1 in 7 men and 1 in 5 women experience an eating disorder by age 40. And in 95% of those cases, the disorder begins by age 25. Now, when most people think of eating disorders, they think of someone who is overly thin. However, you can have an eating disorder and have a normal weight or even be overweight in some cases. Now, the most important thing now many people don't realize about eating disorders is that they are a serious mental health issue and can be very dangerous. They can affect and damage many parts of the body and can even be lethal. If it even crosses your mind that your child might have an eating disorder, remember that these disorders are not about choice. Mental health problems such as anxiety and depression play a very big role, and emotional suffering is often the underlier. Research shows that when you undereat or overeat, it affects the brain process that controls hunger and food intake, reinforcing the actual eating disorder itself. Now, in the United States, Mental Health America reports that 20 million women and 10 million men will experience a clinically significant eating disorder at some time in their life. This mainly includes anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. And here to chat some more are my experts at hand. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you.
Nice to meet
Yeah,
you,
thanks for
JD.
having us. You
Absolutely.
too.
All right, let's dive right in, JD. The National Eating Disorders Association helpline currently has
Mhm.
experienced a 107% increase in contacts since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the dramatic increase in hospitalization clearly shows that people are not getting treatment quickly enough. Why have we seen an increase in eating disorders, especially in kids post-pandemic? And can this be treated and or even reversed, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, for sure, eating disorders are absolutely treatable to full recovery. This is something that we believe in passionate equip, something that I've experienced in my own home. Related to the pandemic, it's very interesting. You mentioned anxiety disorders, and about 85% of people with an eating disorder also have an anxiety disorder. What was the mother of all anxious situations? The beginning of the pandemic, right? So you had all of these, things that made us all so very anxious, combined with we took kids out of their structure and routine. And many kids vulnerable to eating disorders really are people who like structure and routine and benefit from that. So that rug was sort of pulled out from under them. At the same time, everywhere you went, don't put on the quarantine 15. So lots of messages about watching what you eat, etc. Then we also had Zoom all the time. So you're a 10 or a 14 or a 17-year-old kid looking at yourself on Zoom all day long, which you're not normally used to doing. And then you have time now. You have time to start a healthy eating makeover, an exercise routine, etc. So all of those forces really combined to ensure that everyone who was genetically vulnerable, temperamentally vulnerable to developing an eating disorder would develop an eating disorder, and all at the same time. So really a perfect storm of events to accelerate the development in eating disorders of people who might have got one later, or maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe they would have passed their vulnerable period, but the pandemic made sure it happened for lots and lots and lots of kids.
Yeah, and you have a lot of work on your hands to do, but thank you for doing an amazing job at Equip. Amy, most of us start our day by checking our social media accounts and end our day the same way. Maybe we pop back in throughout the day for quick check-ins, but before we've realized that we've scrolled through recent posts for nearly an hour. And a recent study found that almost 70% of the participants reported checking their social media in bed before going to sleep. So one explanation that may drive excessive use of social media, even despite any potential consequences, is fear of missing out, FOMO. And various research studies suggest a connection between social media and symptoms of anxiety and depression. We've talked about this before. And as of recently, because of the pandemic, social isolation has created opportunities for young adults to connect with unhelpful social media resources. What do you say to this? And is social media a big part of the problem?
I mean, I think it's indisputable. Research suggests that youth who engage in social media are more likely to develop an eating disorder. They pay really close attention to what their peers are doing. And it's a really vulnerable time, compounded by the rise in social media, as you pointed out, the constant bombardment, highlight reels, right? TikToks, Instagram that shows how to present themselves, how to dress and act, and what they should be look like, and idealized filters of what image they should be presenting. But a lot of this is not just about their own image; it's a lot about control too during this time of anxiety. So, we might think that eating disorders is all about trying to look a certain way, and oftentimes it's not just an image issue. It's a lot more to it than that. It may be to mask some of the other feelings that are going on. It's a
Yeah,
coping mechanism.
yeah, very
And
interesting.
yeah. It also sometimes is not. So it's very, very interesting when you look at these really young children who even pre all of this sort of influence are developing them. So it's again that perfect storm thing where the social media influence really does come in there and again ensures there were times in our past where a lot of kids might make it out of their childhood or adolescence without dieting. Social media makes that very rare, right? We're
Yeah.
all sold food rules, all these sorts of things that we should be doing. And really, the algorithms, the way that once somebody is vulnerable and looks at a few things, the way it feeds more and more to them and really normalizes this incredibly toxic behavior is a really direct influence.
It's terrible. It's terrible. JD, what is the most important thing a parent can do if they suspect that their child has an eating disorder?
So I would say that the first thing that people can do to reduce the chance of their child having an eating disorder is to make sure that they don't ever fall into a negative energy balance state. So that's making sure your kids eat their breakfast, eat their lunch, or stay on their growth curve, that sort of thing. If you have any suspicions whatsoever, don't run from them. So make sure that you sort of look directly at them. And I know when our daughter developed her eating disorder at 17, and it's interesting to note she had much fewer body image concerns than her friends. Her, my husband and I just celebrated our 35th anniversary, and she actually said, "Thank you for having a marriage that gave me a trauma-free childhood," which I thought was a lovely compliment. However, she and her friends in their senior year decided to go on a healthy eating makeover, and we had no idea she was genetically vulnerable. My mother-in-law has anorexia, which we were not aware of. But so once you see it, don't just dismiss it as a phase. Don't just think, well, all kids do this or all kids diet, things like that, things that I did in the beginning. So really take a look at it, get into the pediatrician, really focus on what was their own personal growth trajectory and are they on that? And so a lot of times now pediatricians are really geared toward obesity prevention. So anytime somebody's going up on the growth curve, they may flag that. However, if they stagnate or go down, that doesn't get flagged in the same way. So all of our kids are really prone to growing on their own pattern. So making sure that that's in play. And then again, be saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing lately. I'm seeing that you don't eat breakfast anymore, or I'm seeing that your lunch is coming home and you haven't eaten it, things like that. And then once you try, if they say, well, it's not a big deal or whatever, start feeding them the way they need to eat. And really their reaction is going to drive.
Yeah.
Was this just something that they were experimenting with and you quashed it? Or is the reaction so big that you know that you've got an eating disorder on your hands? And then again, starting with the pediatrician, and of course, Equip does evaluations and things like that. So really talking to people, visiting the website Feast, Families Empowered and Supporting Treatment of Eating Disorders, going through the warning signs list. I'll just share a classic warning sign that I had no idea about, which is a newfound or heightened interest in baking or cooking. And we are a cooking, baking family. And so it wasn't that unusual, but pretty soon my daughter was baking amazing, beautiful, Food Network worthy stuff, but not eating it herself.
So there was the gratification of the action of doing it. It's almost like living vicariously through the baking itself. But yes, I totally think that this advice is things that we need to hear of. I'm going to shift this to Amy a little bit because I want to make sure that I get this very important question in. Let's highlight the importance of, like you said, early diagnosis and intervention to prevent these hospitalizations. So people with eating disorders often, like you said, appear healthy with normal blood tests. No signs that an eating disorder has become potentially life-threatening are often missed in primary care and emergency settings. Amy, are there any tools or guidelines available to healthcare professionals or even parents to spot the signs that an eating disorder is causing severe health problems?
Well, I think JD just mentioned Feast and of course, NIDA. There's a couple other really great websites that you should take a look at if you're concerned. One other thing I would say, going back to the social media piece, is diversifying your feed a little bit so that we're including different body types in your feed as you're thinking about what your kids are consuming social media wise, not just what they're eating, but what are they consuming from social media. This is a disorder that has absolutely the worst insurance coverage. It's one that continues to be the single longest and costliest mental health disorder when it comes to hospitalization. And so making sure that you have the coverage that's needed, that you're intervening as early as possible, not putting it off, but as JD said, really looking at straight on so that you'll get the best results, because the earlier you're able to diagnose any mental health condition, the better the outcomes will be. And knowing that there is support, 988 went live in July.
That was my next question. Yes, 988. So let's chat about 988. We have about 2 minutes in the segment. So the hope is that this new 3-digit lifeline number is gonna be easier to remember in times of crisis than the 10-digit National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So right now, there's still concern that not enough infrastructure exists to support the country's mental health needs without triggering a response from emergency personnel, forcing people to an emergency room or really a treatment facility. But posts on social media criticizing the program have received a large amount of engagement. Users shared their experiences with Lifeline, and many said that their experience had been poor and encouraged others not to use 988 for fear that they would have a similar experience or even confrontation with law enforcement. We have about a minute. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. Is this counterproductive, this 988, or do you think it'll stand the test of time?
I think that we knew right off the bat it was going to be a very bumpy rollout, because the funding for 988 is very dependent on each state to build it out in the way that they see fit. And so we're going to have to put the pressure on to make sure the funding is there to expand the services that are going to be needed. And is 988 something we need in this country? Absolutely. Is it going to work if we don't put the funding in place? No. So
exactly.
This has to happen.
It's all about money.
There's been a lot of issues with it, and it's going to continue to be that way until each state prioritizes this type of help for its constituents.
I love it. That's why we have people like you, Amy, out there on the front lines, and like JD, really doing your part and really kind of paving the way so these eating disorders, these mental health issues are really, parents and caregivers are able to be equipped with the right information and knowledge. So thank you for the work that you're doing at the Kennedy Forum. And JD, thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing at Equip. You're really changing lives.
Thank you. Thanks for covering this. So important as we head back to school. Let's make sure that if you are concerned about your child, keep in touch with the school and let them know too.
Absolutely. Ladies, thank you so much for coming on. JD, pleasure.
Thank you.
That was My Healthy Minutes brought to us by ogpay.com. That was Amy Kennedy from the Kennedy Forum. Make sure you check them out, thekennedyforum.org. And that was JD Ouellette. Make sure you check out equip.health. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. We'll be right back.